Hello and welcome. You're probably here because, well, staying informed efficiently is key,
Hmm.
especially when you're preparing for something as intense as the UPSC exams. Consider this your shortcut to understanding a pretty major global development.
Absolutely. We're diving deep today into those recent indirect talks between Iran and the U.S. happening over in Muscat. We really want to give you, our listeners, a solid grasp of what could be a pivotal moment.
Exactly, and we're basing our discussion mainly on a detailed piece from the Indian Express. It focuses on this potential trade-off. The U.S. may be easing sanctions if Iran limits its enriched uranium and, promises not to weaponize.
Right. And our mission here, if you will, is kind of threefold. First, figure out why both sides are even talking now. Second, what's changed for them to make this possible. And third, offer a thoughtful look at where these talks might actually be headed.
Okay, so the fact these talks are indirect and happening in Muscat, that location itself says something, doesn't it? Muscat's known for being neutral ground.
It really does. Muscat acting as this facilitator highlights just how sensitive things are. What's interesting is who's reportedly involved. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas and the U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. And their goal seems to be just what you said, sanctions relief for nuclear curbs.
And it wasn't all just formal statements, was it? I read Araghchi mention something about mutual respect early on, and they agreed to keep talking. That sounds, well, a bit positive, right?
It hints at least at some willingness to engage constructively, maybe on process anyway. And then you had President Trump confirming the talks, standing next to Israeli PM Netanyahu, no less. But his language is still very Trump, isn't it? Wants a deal, but also throws out these big threats.
Yeah, that line about a bombing campaign, unlike anything seen before, definitely highlights the, let's say, assertive side of his approach.
Hmm.
But the timing felt really unexpected to me. I mean, he's only a few months in, and the U.S. is heavily involved in that campaign against the Houthis who are linked to Iran. So what gives? What suddenly changed?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The article we're looking at suggests this might be a real watershed moment for Iran. We need to look a bit deeper than the headlines to get it.
Okay, unpack that for us. What makes it a watershed moment?
Well, one huge factor is demographics inside Iran. The average age is, what, around 32? So you've got this massive chunk of the population that doesn't personally remember the 1979 revolution or the Iran-Iraq War or even the last supreme leader succession. Their reality is different.
So different experiences might lead to different priorities.
Exactly. And look, the regime has managed protests and dissent over the years, often from younger people, using a mix of some limited concessions and, well, security crackdowns. Plus, they developed that resistance economy under Trump's sanctions after 2018. It showed resilience, maybe, but didn't solve the fundamental economic problems.
Which leads to that potential shift in priorities you mentioned, especially with Ayatollah Khamenei getting older. He's 85 now.
That seems central. The main worry looks like regime stability, long term. They need to deal with these huge economic threats. Remember President Pezeshkian last August? He said they need at least $100 billion in foreign investment just to tackle inflation and unemployment.
100 billion. Wow. That really drives home the kind of pressure they're under.
It absolutely does. And this economic need seems to be shifting the public talk from leaders. Araghchi himself, the guy in Muscat, he's been openly talking about doing business with the U.S., even bringing up that Boeing deal from 2015 as something desirable.
The Boeing deal, that was tied to the JCPOA, the original nuclear deal, wasn't it?
Precisely. It was like a tangible sign of the economic benefits Iran hoped for back then. And maybe even more telling are these reports, supposedly from President Pezeshkian, suggesting even Khamenei might be open to real U.S. investment now. That would have been unthinkable just a few years back, given the ideology.
So this economic desperation is creating some interesting political movement inside Iran, too.
Oh, definitely. The reformist types are using this economic pressure to push for a nuclear deal, to get sanctions lifted. Meanwhile, the conservatives in parliament, they're still making cautious noises about the U.S. That's their usual stance. But they don't seem to be actively blocking these talks like maybe they would have before. It suggests maybe a kind of grudging, pragmatic consensus is forming around needing some way forward.
And it's not just internal Iranian stuff, right? The whole neighborhood seems to be shifting, too.
Absolutely. The Indian Express piece points out that Iran's axis of resistance, its network of allies and proxies, seems a bit weaker right now. And at the same time, you've got several Gulf Arab states looking more interested in lowering tensions, maybe more economic ties across the region. Even Saudi Arabia, who hated the 2015 deal, seems more open now to a negotiated fix for Iran's nuclear program. That Riyadh shift is pretty big.
That really is a major change in the regional picture.
It is. And even countries like Russia, who maybe weren't pushing Iran so hard on enrichment after Iran helped them with Ukraine, even they've recently said they support a diplomatic solution. So it feels like domestic pressures, regional shifts, maybe even international factors are all kind of pushing in the same direction right now.
Okay, so that's a lot on what might have changed for Iran. What about the other side? How do we get from the Trump administration's very tense relationship with Iran to these talks? It's been rocky, to say the least.
Rocky is putting it mildly. As the article reminds us, Iran's been negotiating on and off with European powers, the E3 and the U.S. for like 2 decades. And it's worth remembering, these talks often happen while the U.S. was also applying military pressure nearby. That's often part of Washington's playbook, right? To strengthen their hand.
And then Trump pulled the U.S. out of the nuclear deal in 2018. What did Iran learn from that whole episode?
The article points to two key things for Tehran. First, they clearly decided they needed a stronger bargaining chip. That's why they started enriching uranium to higher levels, eventually hitting 60%. Second, Trump walking away just shattered any trust in the U.S. sticking to a deal. That led to Khamenei's no war, no talks policy, which obviously seems contradicted now. And of course, Soleimani's assassination in 2020 just made everything even more hostile.
But that underlying need for sanctions relief, that never went away.
Never. The economic pain from U.S. sanctions was constant, so Iran was stuck, wasn't it? Desperately needing sanctions lifted, but deeply skeptical any deal with Washington would last. That kind of explains why, even when the Biden team was trying to revive the old deal in Vienna, Iran never fully committed to going back to the JCPOA.
That's interesting. So by holding back with Biden, they sort of kept the door open for a new negotiation with Trump if he came back, a deal Trump could call his own.
Looks that way. And Araghchi, writing that article recently, blaming the Biden administration for the Vienna talks stalling and directly appealing to Trump's ego, wanting to be seen as a peace president, that strongly suggests it's a deliberate strategy from Tehran. It's about finding a path to sanctions relief that works for Trump politically.
This is incredibly layered. Okay, so looking forward then, what could this all mean? Where might these talks actually go?
Well, on the surface, as the Indian Express piece notes, the immediate goals seem aligned, at least the stated ones. Iran curbs its nuclear program somehow. The U.S. provides some economic relief. Iran keeps saying, as they always have, that nukes are forbidden by their religion, Khamenei's fatwa, and their enrichment now is just a reaction to U.S. hostility, a way to get leverage.
But the big question mark is whether Trump will stop there or push for more, like they tried in 2017, ballistic missiles, proxy groups, that sort of thing.
That's the core uncertainty, isn't it? Will Washington demand limits on missiles or Iran, cutting ties with groups like Hezbollah or the Houthis? Trump's style is usually maximalist at the start, ask for the moon, but maybe be willing to compromise later. And Special Envoy Witkoff has reportedly hinted at some flexibility, so maybe that pattern holds.
And where does Israel fit into this? They've always been very strongly against Iran's nuclear program.
Israel's a huge factor, obviously. They've been pushing hard for Iran's entire nuclear setup to be dismantled, all enrichment stopped forever. Tehran rejects that completely, of course. There's even been talk, maybe speculation, about Israel acting militarily on its own, though Tehran dismisses that. But even though Trump has sometimes said Israel would lead such a thing, the U.S. probably still decides how far it pushes these extra demands in the talks.
It's such a tangled web. What about Iran? Any areas where they might be flexible? The article mentioned the Houthis.
That's possibly one area. The analysis suggests Tehran could probably dial back support for the Houthis in Yemen. I mean, the Houthis are allies, yes, and get Iranian support, but they also act pretty independently. So maybe that's a bargaining chip Iran could play. Plus, having the 2015 deal as a kind of template, a technical blueprint, could speed things up. And Khamenei reportedly giving Araghchi full authority does signal Iran is serious about exploring a deal.
Trump's upcoming trip to the Middle East. The Arab states could play a role there too, couldn't they?
Definitely. If major Arab countries signal support for these U.S.-Iran talks during Trump's visit, that might make it harder for Israel to derail things. And fundamentally, it seems both the U.S. and Iran, maybe tactically, maybe genuinely, want to avoid a full-blown war. We've heard statements leaning that way from VP J.D. Vance and Iranian leaders.
But the timeline. Who knows how long this could take? The article compared it to the 2013-2015 talks for the original deal. That took ages.
That's a fair comparison. These things are incredibly complex, they take time. And maybe the biggest challenge of all is just keeping these specific nuclear talks separate, insulated from all the other conflicts boiling over in the region, Gaza, Syria, Lebanon. Can they compartmentalize?
So wrapping this up, it seems these surprise talks are driven by a mix of things. Iran's really feeling the economic pinch, its society is changing, maybe Trump wants a big foreign policy win, and both sides, perhaps cautiously, see value in dialing down the tension to avoid a bigger war.
That sums it up well. But for you listening, especially our UPSC aspirants, it's so important to see the complexities still involved. What exactly will the U.S. demand beyond the nuclear stuff? Can regional flare-ups be contained? These are huge unknowns that could still sink the whole effort.
And for you, thinking about your syllabus, this potential deal hits so many key areas: stability in West Asia, global power dynamics, nuclear non-proliferation,
Sure.
all incredibly relevant stuff for your exams.
And here's something maybe to chew on. How much will the internal politics, the competing factions and priorities within both Iran and the U.S., actually end up deciding whether these talks succeed or fail, no matter what the leaders say their goals are? It's that interplay between domestic and foreign policy that's often decisive.
If you want to keep digging into this, we really recommend following the reporting and analysis in the Indian Express. They're doing great work staying on top of these developments.
Yeah, and we'd love to hear what you think. What stands out to you in all of this?
Absolutely. Please do like this, subscribe to our channel if you haven't, and drop your comments and any questions below. We really value your input. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back soon with more analysis on the issues that count.